Before today's video starts, we want to bring you a word from our sponsor, NordVPN. One of the best parts about running a YouTube channel is that I get to work wherever I want. I love going out to my local coffee shop and spending a couple hours researching and writing about horrific crimes. The problem is that working in public places can expose me to people who want to access my phone and laptop. But I never worry about my online security because no matter where I am, I use NordVPN. NordVPN is fast and reliable, and it's the only VPN to get a perfect score for PC Magazine. If you want to protect yourself while you're online, NordVPN is giving all criminally listed viewers a special deal of 70% off a 3-year plan, and then if you use the promo code criminally listed, you'll get a month for free. Just go to nordvpn.com/criminallylisted and at the checkout, use the promo code criminallylisted. NordVPN has thousands of servers in nearly 60 countries, and it is super fast and has unlimited bandwidth. It's also inexpensive. You get top-notch internet security for about the price of a cup of coffee. So protect yourself wherever you are by getting NordVPN. Just go to nordvpn.com/criminallylisted to save 70% off a 3-year contract and use the promo code criminallylisted to get a month free. Number 3. Steve Carter Jr. In 1980, Steve Carter was an officer in the U.S. Army and he was stationed in Oahu, Hawaii. Steve was married to a woman named Pat who was a school teacher. They decided to adopt a child, and they found a 3.5-year-old boy named Tenzin Amiya who was living in an orphanage in Oahu. Tenzin had been living in the orphanage for about 3 years. On June 23, 1977, Tenzin, who was an infant, was with his mother, and she was squatting in a home in Oahu. His mother was arrested, but she did not have any pieces of identification on her. She told the police that her name was Jane May and her son was Tenzin Amiya. She was asked who the father of the baby was. His mother said she did not know anything about him except that he was a Hawaiian native. The police thought that this was odd because Tenzin had blonde hair and blue eyes. But the police had nothing else to go on, so they took the woman's word for it. Jane May was subsequently sent to a psychiatric hospital, and Tenzin was placed into the orphanage. After Steve and Pat Carter adopted Tenzin, they gave him a new name, William Stephen Tenzin Carter. He went by the name Steve Jr. Not long after Steve Jr. was adopted, his family moved to New Jersey and he grew up there. He went to university and eventually settled in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. He got a job as a medical software salesman. When Steve Jr. reflected on his early life, he noted some odd things. For example, his birth certificate was created when he was a year old. Also, his mother claimed that his father was a native of Hawaii. But even in adulthood, Steve Jr. did not look like he came from Polynesian descent. Notably, he had blonde hair and blue eyes. In December 2010, he did a DNA test and he discovered he was not of Polynesian descent. His heritage was actually Scandinavian. Then in early 2011, Steve Jr. was reading CNN on his iPad and a story caught his attention. It was about a woman named Nedra Nance. Nedra grew up in Bridgeport, Connecticut. When she was in her teens, she began to wonder if the woman who was raising her, Ann Petway, was really her mother. Nedra was suspicious because she had repeatedly asked Petway for her birth certificate, but Petway was never able to provide it. Then in 2005, Nedra demanded her birth certificate because she needed to get health insurance. Nedra needed health insurance because she was pregnant. Petway gave her a birth certificate, but it turned out to be a forgery. When Nedra confronted Petway, Petway confessed that she wasn't Nedra's biological mother. Petway told her that her biological mother was a drug addict who had abandoned her. 5 years later, Nedra was doing some investigating on the internet. On a hunch, Nedra went to the website for the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. She happened upon a photo of a baby who looked just like her when she was a baby. The infant also looked just like her daughter when she was a baby. The missing girl was named Carlina White, and she had been kidnapped from a hospital in Harlem, New York. Harlem is about 55 miles from Bridgeport, where Nedra grew up. Carlina's parents had taken her to the hospital 17 days after she was born because she had a high fever. A woman disguised as a nurse picked up Carlina and walked out of the hospital with her. Carlina's parents never saw her again. Also, no arrests were made in the kidnapping. After finding Carlina White's profile, Nedra called the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. In January 2011, she underwent DNA testing. Months later, Nedra found out that she was really Carlina White, and the woman who raised her, Ann Petway, was really her kidnapper. Nedra was reunited with the White family, and Ann Petway was arrested. In November 2012, Petway pleaded guilty to kidnapping, and she was sentenced to 12 years of prison. Nedra/Carlina's story got the wheels turning in Steve Carter Jr.'s head. He went to missingkids.com, which is the website for the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. He looked around the website and he came across an age-progressed photo that immediately caught his attention. When he saw the image, he said, "Holy crap, it's me." Steve Jr. immediately called the Honolulu Police Department and they began to investigate. In February 2011, Steve Jr. gave a sample of his DNA to the Honolulu Police Department. At the end of 2011, Steve Carter Jr., who was 35 years old, learned a lot more about his early life than he ever expected to. It turned out that his name was Marks Panama Moriarty Barnes. His father is Mark Barnes, who was a Vietnam vet and a journalist. His mother's name was not Jane May. His mother's real name was Charlotte Moriarty, who was an artist. Mark and Charlotte were never married. After giving birth to Marks, Charlotte started to suffer serious mental problems. For example, after she got home from the hospital with Marks, for 3 weeks, day and night, Charlotte wore a blindfold. On June 21, 1977, when Marks was 5 months old, Charlotte took him for a walk in his stroller. Hours later, Mark found the stroller abandoned at a bus stop near their home. That evening, Charlotte and Marks did not return home. Charlotte had a history of disappearing, but she always came back. So Mark did not report her and Marks missing until 3 weeks later. When Mark realized that Charlotte was not coming back and had kidnapped their son, Mark conducted his own search for them, but it was fruitless. He figured that Charlotte had hidden Mark somewhere. Mark had no idea that 2 days after Charlotte kidnapped Marks, she was arrested for squatting in a home and Marks was put into an orphanage. The orphanage was just 30 miles from Mark's home. After hearing that his son, who had been missing for nearly 35 years, was still alive, Mark Barnes was elated and he said it was a miracle. Steve Carter Jr. got in contact with his biological father and half-sister, who was the product of a relationship their mother had been in before she started dating Mark Barnes. They all planned to meet, but there are no reports if they ever did. One mystery remains from the case. A few days after Steve Jr.'s biological mother, Charlotte Moriarty, was admitted into the psychiatric hospital, she checked herself out of the hospital against the advice of the staff. Where she went after she checked herself out of the hospital is unknown. Charlotte has not been seen since and is considered missing. If Charlotte Moriarty is still alive, at the time of this video, she would be 74 years old. Number 2. Miché Solomon. In mid-1996, Michael Solomon, who lived in Cape Town, South Africa, found out that his girlfriend, Livonia, was pregnant. Michael was a bit surprised by the news, because he knew that Livonia had previously had trouble getting pregnant and she had suffered several miscarriages while she was in other relationships. But as the months went by, Livonia's stomach got bigger and they prepared for the baby. They decided not to live together during the pregnancy. On April 30th, 1997, Michael went over to Livonia's house and found a large group of people there. He was surprised when Livonia introduced him to his newborn daughter. Livonia told him she had given birth that morning and they sent her home a few hours later. They decided to name their daughter Miché. Not long after Miché's birth, Michael moved in with Livonia. 2 years later, they got married. The family was a happy one. Michael worked as an electrician and Livonia was a seamstress while Miché went to school. The church was an important part of their lives. The school year in South Africa begins in January. In January 2015, 17-year-old Miché was entering her final year of high school. In the first few days of school, Miché's friends noticed that there was a 13-year-old girl who had just started at the school who looked just like her. The girl's name was Cassidy Nurse. Miché's friends were not the only ones who noticed a resemblance between her and Cassidy. Several teachers thought that the girls were related. Miché and Cassidy struck up an immediate friendship. Miché noticed that Cassidy seemed to really enjoy getting attention from an older girl. So Miché asked Cassidy if she had an older sister. Cassidy said she did. Cassidy said her older sister's name was Zephanie, but she had never met her older sister. Cassidy explained that nearly 18 years earlier, 4 years before she was born, her sister, Zephanie, who was 3 days old, was kidnapped from the hospital. Her parents never saw Zephanie again. Miché told her parents about Cassidy and her sister's kidnapping. Her father, Michael, had heard about the kidnapping. Michael was an electrician, and he had worked some jobs with Cassidy and Zephanie's father, Mornay, who was a construction worker. That one afternoon in late January, Miché and Cassidy went out to lunch at a local McDonald's. Mornay came to the restaurant to pick up his daughter, Cassidy. He had heard about his daughter's new friend, so he went inside the McDonald's to talk to Miché. Mornay was shocked when he saw Miché because she looked just like his ex-wife, Celeste. Celeste was the mother of both Cassidy and his missing daughter, Zephany. Mornay and Celeste had got divorced in the years after Cassidy's birth. Mornay asked Miché some questions about herself, and then he took the cup she had been drinking from. He told her that he was going to throw it out for her. Instead, he kept it because he wanted to use it to test her DNA. Mornay immediately called the police, and they began to investigate the possibility that Miché Solomon was really Zephany's nurse. One of the first things the police did was ask Livonia and Michael for Miché's birth certificate. They were not able to produce it. A DNA test was then conducted, and it proved that Miché was really Zephany's nurse, Mornay and Celeste nurse's long-lost daughter. Mornay and Celeste had always hoped that they would be reunited with Zephany. They had no idea she grew up just a mile away from them. Eventually, Livonia admitted that Miché was not her biological daughter. Livonia said that she had suffered a miscarriage in December 1996, but she continued to pretend she was pregnant. She claimed she adopted Miché from a woman named Sylvia, and she had paid Sylvia. Livonia said she was sure that the adoption was legal. The police did not believe her story, and she was arrested for kidnapping. The news was shocking to both Miché and the man who raised her, Michael Solomon. He had never considered the possibility that Miché wasn't his biological daughter, let alone that his wife had kidnapped her. Michael said that people always commented on the resemblance between him and Miché. After the DNA test, Miché was placed in a safe house, and she started to have visitations with her biological family. Miché assured them that she had a good life and she was not abused. In August 2016, Livonia Solomon was sentenced to 10 years of prison. Miché continues to go by the name Miché Solomon, and she did not revert back to her birth name, Zephany Nurse. Miché says she loves the Solomons, and they did an excellent job raising her. A book about her life was published in August 2019 called Zephany, Two Mothers, One Daughter, an astonishing true story, and it is dedicated to both Celeste and Livonia. Miché has said she has a poor relationship with her biological father, Mornay. She said she simply doesn't love him like a father. She went on to say he is a lost cause and he fails as a father. She said he didn't just fail her, he isn't there for his other children either. Miché said that she wishes that Mornay's other children have parents like Livonia and Michael Solomon. Number 1. Oscar Alfredo Ramirez Castaneda. Oscar Oviedo Ramirez Ramos was a lieutenant in the Guatemalan Army. In December 1982, Lieutenant Ramirez was on a secret mission. After his mission, he returned to his home in Zacapa, which is a municipality in eastern Guatemala. Lieutenant Ramirez was unmarried, and he lived with his mother on a farm. When he returned home, he had a 3-year-old boy with him. Lieutenant Ramirez told his family that the boy was named Oscar Alfredo Ramirez Castaneda, and he was his son. Lieutenant Ramirez explained that he had sex with an unmarried woman and she gave birth to Oscar. He said that he would now raise Oscar. 8 months later, Lieutenant Ramirez was killed when the truck he was driving overturned. After his father's death, Oscar was raised by his paternal grandmother. As Oscar grew up, his family told him that his father was a heroic man and he should be revered. As a result, Oscar idolized his father. The rest of the community also thought highly of Lieutenant Ramirez. At the military school in Zacapa, there was a soccer field named after him. In the late 1990s, Oscar's grandmother, who raised him, passed away. In 1998, when Oscar was in his late teens, he left his native Guatemala. He traveled north and illegally entered the United States. He eventually made his way to Framingham, Massachusetts, where he got a job in the produce section of a grocery store. Then in 2000, Oscar got a strange letter from one of his cousins who lived in Guatemala. The letter contained a newspaper article about a massacre that happened in a village in Guatemala called Dos Aires in December 1982. At the time, Guatemala was in the midst of a bloody civil war which began 22 years earlier in 1960. The war was between the right-wing anti-communist government and several left-wing guerrilla groups. In December 1996, peace was finally brokered after 36 years of war. One of the conditions of the peace treaty was that only perpetrators of atrocities could be prosecuted. It's believed that during the Civil War, over 600 massacres were committed. Not long after the peace was brokered, a lawyer named Sarah Romero was tasked with investigating the Dos Aires massacre. She learned that on December 6, 1982, a commando squad of K-Bills, which is the Special Operations Wing of the Guatemalan Army, had gone to the village, which was home to about 60 families. The K-Bills were disguised as rebels, and the massacre was meant to frame the rebels. Over the course of 48 hours, the 20-man squad executed nearly every member of the village. In total, over 250 men, women, and children were slaughtered. The newspaper article that Oscar's cousins sent to him said that only 2 young boys survived the massacre. They were kidnapped by the K-Bills. The article explained that Sarah Romero had tracked down one of the boys. He was taken home by the squad's baker, and he was raised as a member of the baker's family. The survivor said that the baker's family treated him horribly and used him like a slave. After it was discovered he was a survivor of the massacre, he was given political asylum in Canada. He was given asylum because the military had committed the massacre while they were dressed like rebels in order to frame the rebels. But the fact that the boy was taken home and raised by the K-Bill squad's baker was ironclad evidence that the army was actually responsible for the massacre. The article went on to say that Romero was looking for the second boy who was taken from the village. Then Oscar got the shock of his life. The newspaper said that the other boy's name was Oscar Alfredo Ramirez Castaneda, and he was most likely living in the United States. Oscar did not remember anything about the village or any other family. He did not even remember the man who called himself his father, Lieutenant Ramirez. Oscar's earliest memories was living on the farm in Zacapa with his grandmother. After Oscar read the article, he called one of his aunts. His aunt said she had read the newspaper article as well, and she said it was all lies. She said it was just an attempt to smear his father, who was a hero. Oscar accepted the explanation and he went on with his life. He got married and he and his wife had 3 children together. Oscar was eventually promoted to manager and he and his wife bought a house. But then in 2009, there was a crackdown on unregistered immigrants and Oscar lost his job. He managed to find work soon afterward. In the mornings, he worked as a supervisor at a cleaning company, and then at night, he worked as a supervisor at a fast food restaurant that specialized in burritos. In the fall of 2010, his wife became pregnant a 4th time. What Oscar didn't know was that over the past decade, prosecutor Sarah Romero continued to investigate the massacre of Dos Ayres. In May 2011, Romero got a hold of Oscar's email address. Romero then sent an email to Oscar asking him to call her. Oscar was a bit uneasy about calling Romero because of his immigration status in the United States. He thought she might be calling him about that. But he decided to risk it, and he called Romero. Romero confirmed that Oscar was the man she was looking for, and told him she had important news to share, but she thought it would be better if she sent the information in an email. Oscar read the email, and he learned that his life had been a lie, and it confirmed a lot of information that was in the newspaper article that his cousin had sent him 11 years earlier. In the email, Romero explained that Oscar had been living in Dos Ayres. When he was 3 years old, a 20-man commando squad of K-Bills, disguised as rebels, massacred the villagers. This included Oscar's mother and his 8 siblings. One of the perpetrators of the massacre was Lieutenant Oscar Oviedo Ramirez Ramos, the man who claimed to be Oscar's father. In reality, Lieutenant Ramirez had kidnapped him. Romero asked Oscar to take a DNA test to confirm that he really was a survivor of the Dos Ayres massacre. In June 2011, Oscar gave a sample of his DNA to the investigators. In August 2011, 2 months after Oscar gave a sample of his DNA, he received a phone call from the man who performed the DNA test. He confirmed that Oscar was a survivor of the massacre. His real name was Alfredo Castaneda. The caller had more surprising news. Oscar and the other young boy who was kidnapped were not the only villagers who survived the massacre. 2 men who lived in the village had been working in different villages at the time of the massacre. One of those men was Tranquilino Castaneda, Oscar's biological father. Investigators tracked down Tranquilino, who was in his 70s. At first, Tranquilino was not told that his son was alive. Instead, they sat him down for a video call with Oscar. The investigators asked Tranquilino if he recognized the 32-year-old man on the other end of the video call. Tranquilino said that he did not recognize the man. Then they told him it was his son, Alfredo. Tranquilino was shocked. He was sure that his wife and all 9 of his children had been killed in the December 1982 massacre. After that initial conversation, Oscar and Tranquilino began to talk frequently. Before long, they were talking daily. Oscar learned that his father had been broken by the loss of his family. He never remarried, and he became an alcoholic. The Ramirez family, who raised Oscar, were also shocked by the news. But they accepted the reality of the situation, and they even invited Tranquilino to visit them on the farm where Oscar grew up. Tranquilino eventually grew close to the Ramirez family, and he even celebrated the holidays with them. In May 2012, a little less than a year after they were reconnected, Tranquilino traveled to Framingham to meet with his long-lost son, whom he thought had been dead for 30 years. He also met his 4 grandchildren he never knew existed. Tranquilino spent the summer with his newly found family. As the summer of 2012 was coming to an end, Oscar was granted political asylum in the United States. Thank you so much for watching today's video. Hopefully you found it interesting. If you did, please give us a thumbs up and subscribe for more videos just like it. Also, please go to criminallylisted.com where you can suggest cases, buy merch, and find out about an exclusive podcast. We're also on Facebook at facebook.com/criminallylisted. But that is all for today. Thank you again for watching.